welcome to the High Path Avian Influenza Situational Update. I'm Ashley Honsberger. I'm the Executive Director for Poultry Industry Council, and I'm pleased to be hosting this on behalf of some funding we received from the CAP pool of funding through OMAFRA to help us do outreach and information sharing as the High Path situation evolves throughout the fall. So tonight is our third session. We're going to be continuing on until December. Each night, we're hoping to bring you a little bit of learning content, some new skills, some new resources, and then, of course, those timely updates from the experts that join us each time we have these sessions. So just a reminder, the recording will be posted in the next few days on our Biosecurity and Disease webpage, as well as any of the links or any of the handouts that we have talked about tonight. So if you missed something, don't feel like you have to scramble to write it down. We try our best to get everything posted right away on that Biosecurity and Disease page. Some of you may have already heard about this over the last couple of sessions, but in case you haven't, Poultry Industry Council, we have a new emergency planning guide that we've just launched. So in short, we had this beautiful paper copy available to Ontario producers. Simply sign up through our website. But we also have an online version with all the same content. And secondarily, we have an app developed where you can keep all of your tailored protocols, all of your content, contact information, anything related to each of your farm sites to help you have that information at your fingertips in case any sort of emergency occurs. So it's on poultryindustrycouncil.ca. Highly recommend you check it out. It's free and it's awesome. And on that note, we do have our very last lunch and learn related to emergency planning. So I'm going to walk through the guide in detail. We've got Aldam talking about a whole bunch of different sort of companion resources that go along with it. And then we've got Jonathan Giray, who's joining us to talk about that essential checklist for farm safety, particularly in the compliance space. So all the different types of training like WMIS and anything that you need to keep yourself and your staff safe. So please join us. It's free. It's 45 minutes of just great learning. And on to tonight. So we have our Canadian Food Inspection Agency friends joining us, Vaishnavi as well as Cassandra from the two different parts of that organization. We've got Dr. Luci Rosca and Christoph who are going to be talking through some of those topics you see on the right. And then at the end, we do have the live Q&A. So for those of you who have questions immediately or as you're going along, please use the Q&A function down at the bottom, and we will get to all of the questions before the session is over. So with that, I know Vaishnavi was having a little bit of internet trouble, so if we could all just be a bit patient, hopefully it all goes smoothly, but it was happening a bit earlier, so fingers crossed.
Thank you, Ashley. Good evening, everyone. I'm Vaishnavi Kalsy. I'm from the liaison role for CFIA AI response team. I also have Cassandra from movement control side of things if you have any questions related to that to answer it. I do have internet issues, so if there's something that's going on, I'll turn off my video so you can hear me better. Before I start with my presentation, I just wanted to give a little bit of update of what's been going on with the waves. For the spring wave, we did have infected premise 9 released as an IP on Saturday, and we'll have the IP 25 released tomorrow. That's for the spring side of things. Now moving on to the fall, we did have a co-mingling event that occurred during an auction, which resulted in some trace outs. And from that trace outs, we did have 3 infected premises that has been registered as IP 33, 34, and 35 since last Tuesday. So that's been online. There has been a PCZ primary control zone allocated to it. So you will see all of that updated in the map online. So moving on to the presentation, I'm just going to quickly share the screen here. Okay. So today's agenda is just to go an overview of the basics that we have learned in the last couple calls. Once you know the basics of it, like where to make the call, who to contact for any kind of health sickness that you see in your small flocks, and some do's and don'ts from our end that can help you to like better understand how to proceed with AI and what happens next from CFIA perspective and what do you need to be prepared for. So just the basics, we all know that AI kind of comes from wild flocks. So just try to not have your small flocks or birds come in contact with wild birds, even though they look perfectly healthy, they can carry AI, and that can lead to like your small flocks getting avian influenza as well. In order to do that, how you can do it is biosecurity measures. There are some 5 basic rules that you can follow. Just prevent contact with wild birds and other animals, frequently clean at, spot the signs if there's any symptoms, make sure to report it as early as possible, limit exposures to visitors that can bring AI as well. So like just biosecurity measures over there, and keep new birds separate from entering your flock. Now, even though after doing a lot of biosecurity measures, sometimes you will see symptoms on your small flocks. And here are some of the symptoms laid out on the slide here. If you see any of these signs, please report it as early as possible, and try to notify either CFIA or private veterinarian. So the next slide is basically where to make those calls. So if you notice anything that's going on wrong with your small flocks, please make sure to call your private veterinarian immediately, let them know of the things that's been happening. You can give them the details, and they can probably do the testing for you as well. Or you could contact the local district office, so CFIA office during regular business hours, or you can use the toll-free number to call us after hours. Note, if it's not your small flocks, but even if you see like a sick or dead wild bird, you can contact CWHC to report it to them, and just be prepared to give like a full scenario of where did you see it, what kind of symptoms, just giving enough background to them so that they can come and do the sampling from their end. Now, since you notice the symptoms, while you're making that call, and from the further steps, what are some of the do's and don'ts and how you can prevent, or even just after you notice the symptoms, what kind of preparations can you do? Make sure the major do's is to reach out to CFIA or local boards if you have any questions. If you're not sure what to do in certain situations, we are here to help you out. So feel free to reach out with any questions that you have. I've told this multiple times already, but please report your sick birds, because that's an important step for us to know what's been going on with the small flocks in the region. So please do call us and let us know. Minimize the movement in and out. Now, if you're seeing the symptoms, biosecurity is the key. Now, if you do maximize the movements in and out, that can cause the spreading of the disease, and we don't want that. So please do minimize that. And if you haven't developed a biosecurity, please do develop one and follow them. That's the key to preventing the AI, and we do want to control the spread as much as possible. And based on the call, we'll give you further steps or guidance. So just make the call, wait for the further guidance and steps, either through CFIA or through your local boards. As I said before, the don'ts are, we don't want to spread the disease. Don't ignore the symptoms. Even if it's like a minor symptom, one dead small flock, just give us a call. If you see you're not sure, just give us a call and we'll let you know what to do. Don't move the birds or things, like it can spread through just materials as well. So we don't want that spreading, so don't move them. Just wait for further guidance and steps. Now, what happens next? So you've made the call. We'll basically fill out a questionnaire. We'll ask you multiple questions. It could be your private vet asking you multiple questions as well, or CFIA folk might ask you multiple questions. Now, based on those questions and your answers, we'll determine if it's a low risk or a high risk. Now, low risk might mean like one dead flock out of like, say, 100. Either your private vet or CFIA, whoever you're contacting, will tell you if it's a low risk and if you just need to monitor. There's certain stages where we'll make a decision. If it's a low risk, sometimes the sampling is not needed, and we'll just ask you to monitor it for a couple more days. And if there's any changes, just report it. If there's no changes, then it should be good. But if it's a high risk, then most collect samples for further testing. We don't just declare it as AI, we do testing to make sure the results come back positive, and based on positive or negative, and based on that, we'll say if it's AI or not. So results will determine what the future direction is going to be like. And if it does come back positive, the premise is going to be deemed as infected premise. Now, once the infected premise has been deemed, we inform OMAFRA, FBCC, everyone gets involved in the process, and there's advisories sent out. They'd reach out to the producers to educate them on what the next steps might be. And in the meanwhile, if you haven't received anything and you have questions, always here to answer. So just reach out to us or your local boards and we'll answer any concerns or questions you'll have. Now, when it comes to controls and movements, there have been few changes that took place today from the national. So we did have a national event response plan. A call took place where everyone was invited. If you didn't have a chance to take part in those calls, we have a presentation that has been circulated to FBCC OMAFRA for further distribution to the producers and industry. So if you haven't got that or read through the presentation, feel free to reach out and get those presentations so you can see those changes. Now, the major changes that has taken place with ERP has come with the primary control zone. When infected premise is deemed, there's two ways. So either it can be poultry or non-poultry. By default, if it's a non-poultry premise, it won't have a primary control zone around it. Whereas if it's a poultry commercial or poultry non-commercial, it will have a primary control zone around it. There have been a few changes around this, and we'll go through that briefly, but for a detailed version of it, please go through the presentation. Also, it has been updated online, so you will be able to see the detailed version online. So as we said, like with the new event response plan, there's a new zone that has been added called security zone. Initially, if you look here, we just had an infected zone that is 0 to 3 kilometers from the infected premise, and a restricted zone that was 3 to 10 kilometers from the infected zone. Now, after the 14-day outbreak surveillance period is completed, that is basically starts from the disposal process. After the disposal process is completed, we have a 14-day outbreak surveillance period where testings are done just to make sure everything's okay, no more sick bird calls. Once that's completed, the infected zone is released, and that now becomes as one full security zone. So that has been one of the changes in the event response plan, but there's also changes with the general permit. Now we can look into the general permit. The form number is 5752. It's been updated online, so you can download it and see those changes. I'm not going to go over all the details here because we have already had a call regarding that. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask and we'll try to answer it. The other major change with the event response plan is around commercial versus non-commercial primary control zone. Initially, we just had one primary control zone, and that included commercial and non-commercial both together, but now we have different movement controls around it. So just to give you a little bit of specifics, when it comes to commercial primary control zone, we do have different types of permits. There's a specific permit or a traceable general permit, and that's based on the risk factor. So if it's a high risk factor, you will have a specific permit that you need to apply for. If it's a low risk movement, then you would have to go through the traceable general permit. For movements in non-commercial primary control zone, however, it doesn't matter what risk factors, since there's no trade implications involved. All the movements around a non-commercial primary control zone will have a general traceable permit. Also, the general traceable permit in general was not going to have any testing or flock health questionnaires. So by default, a health questionnaire testings, DBS and stuff like that, so dead bird surveillance or any other testing requirements. Whereas if you are applying for a specific permit on a commercial primary control zone, you would have to go through the testings. And there have been changes around those testings as well. So as I said, if you haven't received the presentation, it goes through the whole detail. It was a 1-hour presentation, so I don't want to take up the time right now to go through the whole process again. But please feel free to reach out to FBCC OMAFRA or even CFIA if you haven't got it, and we can circulate that around. And you can go through the changes and see what those changes are and ask questions based on that. Now, those changes have been updated to the website and can be found on inspection.gc.ca. I'll go through the website again with you guys just to show you what changes have been made and how you can find the different changes there. Also, there's a way to subscribe to email notifications specific to AI as well. So if you haven't already done that, I would highly recommend go online, subscribe an email notification. Specifically, you can click AI and then go through the whole process. So that's pretty much the presentation I have. I'm going to quickly share the screen for the online version. Can everyone see that?
No, we're still looking. Oh, there we go. It's come up now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. It's just on the mapping side of things. Just want to quickly go through this. Initially, we didn't have the differentiation between commercial, non-commercial, infected zone, restricted zone kind of things. Since the change that took place with event response plan today, we have those changes made online. You cannot see a non-commercial security zone right now because there's nothing in the mapping that basically specifies to that. So in case in future, if we have a non-commercial security zone, it will get updated and we'll have that section over here as well. The other important changes is to the permits. So if you go to the inspection.gc.ca under permits and conditions, as we went last couple of weeks as well, now the important change would be it asks you if you are on a non-commercial PCZ only. If you say yes and continue, as I mentioned, it will just give you you will need a general permit. Just because it's a non-commercial PCZ, there won't be any requirements for a specific permit, what kind of movement there is. However, if you do say no to it, then you'll go through the same detailed process of selecting if it's a live bird, eggs and stuff. And based on the requirements, if it's high risk, then it will say that you need, say for example, I'm just gonna say, yeah, so this one said export is prohibited. You'll need a general permit, but if you do a different selection, it will say a specific permit. Through that, you will see the difference in commercial primary control zone, but you won't see a difference with like the non-commercial primary control zone. Also, the other thing I wanted to go through is the permit requirements. So like I mentioned, the form has changed for general permit. So if you click on permits, you will be getting this downloadable version of general permit. It has been updated online. So if you download that, you will be able to see the changes that comes with it. Finally, as I mentioned for the email notifications, you can go up here. So any email notification services for animal information, I'll share this link on the chat so you have it. Once you go there, you just have to fill out your first name, last name, and email address. You don't have to click on everything. If you just want AI specific, there's a section here, just check box on AI, and you will get the email notifications regarding any updates that CFIA has on AI. And that's pretty much it from my end. So I'm just going to stop sharing, and thank you.
Thank you, Vaishnavi. A really good overview. And of course, all of those links are available through the Government of Canada website, and we've compiled them all on the PIC website. So now I'm going to invite Luci to join and start sharing your information.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this webinar tonight. My agenda for tonight is about risk assessment for your flock. Just do it, there is no try. Best practices to keep avian influenza out, clean and sanitation tips in scenarios. If you would like to make sure that your flock is not getting avian influenza, you probably better do a risk assessment and put some questions of what's surrounding you and then how is your farm better protected. We're going to start with if there are any migratory waterfowl present in the area, how close is the nearest surface water to the barn, are domestic waterfowl present to the premise, do your birds have access to the free range, do family members or employees and their dogs have contact with wild waterfowl or near the premise? Are the wild birds able to enter the barn or get access to the feeders? And the list continues with carcasses being stored or disposed of near one or more the barn's production unit. What is the water source for your flock? Do you share the equipment with your neighbors? Do you keep your poultry area and equipment clean? Are bedding materials stored in a manner that prevents contamination by wild birds' feces? Now, doing that list, there are some common biosecurity break excuses. The University of Minnesota Extension list put this together, and none of this listed are acceptable for breaking the biosecurity protocols. I am only going to spend a few minutes in a barn, so I don't need to dress up. I have an emergency and need to fix a fan, feed line, and the tools are in the other barn. I will be quick. I run out of the supplies and I had to skip putting on boots and coveralls or using hand sanitizer. It is only this one time. It will be okay. I wear my lucky hat everywhere. The door to the barn is locked and I have an armful of supplies and I can't unlock the door, so I will put the boxes on the ground and then unlock the door. When in a barn, I leave the entryway door open for convenience. I just came back from hunting and decided to stop by the farm and see how the flock was doing. I will leave the dead birds outside the door and deal with them later. And my neighbor will come to help me out, and I think he knows the biosecurity protocol. Just keep that in mind, and then just make sure that this is not exhaustive list, but like I will just pay attention on those because they feel like they're common sense, but they're not. There are things that you just have to do it. There is no try. And then some of these are like separate your flocks from the wildlife and the wild birds. Use an enclosed shelter and fence outdoor areas. Smaller mesh hardware cloth can keep it out wild birds and allow your flock outdoor time. I will keep the different species of poultry and age group separated. These traits can make poultry more or less prone to disease and prevent your birds from having contact with other birds that could introduce the avian influenza. Make sure you separate your birds from your neighbor's birds. And the list continues. Separate new birds or returning exhibition birds from the flock for at least 30 days. Make sure the separation is well enough to keep your flock safe by separate airspace, tools, clothing. Handle these birds last. Return crates or other equipment back to the property only after you've cleaned and disinfected them. And this includes when you're coming back from the slaughterhouse. Make sure to clean and disinfect vehicles and trail tires. Be aware of where you clean the crates. Make sure the runoff can get to your birds. And least but not last, don't share equipment or use materials like egg cartons from neighbors' area or bird owners. Also, it is recommended to limit who visits your birds at home. If someone else must visit your birds, ask them about what other bird contact they had recently had, and ask them to wash their hands and wear clean clothes and footwear. There is something else about hunting that we would like to remind you. After hunting, do not get domestic poultry in contact with your hunting clothing, footwear, equipment, dogs, vehicle that may be contaminated. Ontario Animal Health Network, they do have this fact sheet, beautiful with practical tips for your flock, with restrict entry. You should just change dedicated disposable clean boots and coveralls upon entering the barn, minimize visits to other poultry farm, implement a pest control program, avoid mixing species of birds or contact with outside birds, wash hands and use hand sanitizer, but also minimize entry of vehicles, supplies, equipment to your farm and limit vehicle access to your flock, and regularly monitor your flock and review your biosecurity plan and flock health program with your veterinarian or on a regular basis. There are some best practices that I would like to remind you to keep feeders and waters clean and out of reach of wild birds and clean up feed spills. Change feeding practices if wild birds continue to be present. Use dedicated or clean clothing and footwear when working with poultry. Clean and disinfect equipment that comes in contact with your birds, such as shovels and rakes. Clean and disinfect poultry housing and equipment, often to limit contact with birds in their waste, but evaluate your cleaning practices as well. These are the major steps for cleaning and disinfecting. The first one is to remove the litter, manure, dust, and cobwebs from the house. Wash the house using pressure water. Scrub and scrape all organic matter from the building and equipment surfaces. Disinfect the building and equipment using an appropriate disinfectant. Make sure to follow the directions on the manufacturer's label of the disinfectant, and dry and air out the building. Good cleaning program needs to be put in place across the entire farm and have proper equipment and professional training. It's very important. This is a beautiful prevention clinic and disinfectant integral, that's in part of the component of the biosecurity program. It's a 360-degree with 8 important steps that you can find it on Vetocanol website. They do start with insect control, then organic matter removal, then water line cleaning up and disinfection, then surface detergent application, moving to washing and rinsing for surfaces, disinfection using spraying or foaming. Another optional disinfection is fogging and misting spray. Then the second insect control and rodent control. I invite you to visit their website. I'm not endorsing any disinfectants, but just this is a beautiful chart that you can follow up and then perform all the steps that they're required. A little bit about porous surfaces, and cleaning conventional facilities presents a big challenge due to the wooden construction materials that are impossible to disinfect in comparison with the smooth material surfaces, and decrease how effective the cleaning plan is. In the past, it's been used formaldehyde, but it comes with human safety and concerns, and sometimes it's not available where it needs to be used in ventilated areas. And other options that may be working for these porous surfaces will be to use heat-enhanced disinfectants, high-pressure sprays, or disinfectant foams, sealants to reduce the raw surface of the wood. I do have a list of disinfectants here, and again, I'm not endorsing any of them. They say there isn't in any way signified endorsement of a particular product, but they do have good characteristics of selected disinfectants, and they're showing up which ones are working and which ones are not. To give an example, the avian influenza virus, it is an envelope virus. And if you look for alcohols, they're effective, aldehydes effective, biguanides limited. We have hypochlorites, we have halogens, we have oxidizing agents and phenols that are affected, but there is a variable effectiveness on the quads. So you just make sure that you're picking up the right disinfectant to use, because sometimes you may say, hey, I use all those steps and I still have problems in my farm, in my barn, and then I need to know why. And this applies for the other types of viruses and bacteria and all types of spores and fungi as well. Now, I do have 3 scenarios that I want to go with you, not as much as in detail as CFIA did it. It's just something just to pay attention on. If your birds may have signs of avian influenza, what you should do. You are legally responsible to notify the veterinarian or the nearest CFIA animal health district if there is a suspicious of the avian influenza. I would suggest to look up the number of your district office and have it on hand. Be prepared to talk about your flock, number of birds, how many sick, died, signs, and gather some information. Where you got the bird, who has been to your property, if you visited any poultry flocks in the past 14 days. These are very important things that you need to start first to put that in place. Now, the second one is my farm neighbor tested positive for avian influenza. First of all, do not panic. It will likely be in a zone of surveillance, and they'll be probably testing and monitoring. Call your vet if you see any signs or deaths with your flock. And the third one, what do you do if you spot a sick or dead wild bird on a property? As my previous speaker mentioned, contact the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative. The phone number is listed here. Please do not touch that bird. If positive, CFIA will be contacted and they will likely perform surveillance and testing on your farm. That's all I have so far. Thank you.
That's great, Lucy. Thank you. It kind of reminded me of when I walked into a Tim Hortons recently and the lady did this and said, "Can I please take your order?" And all I could think was, oh my goodness, please go wash your hands. So when Christoph mentions touching your cell phone and then going into the barn and leaving the barn, and you know, it's an invisible thing. We just have to be really, really cognizant that we don't want to be spreading it around through tools or anything. Take it away, Christoph.
Okay, good. So just by a little bit of introduction for everyone, since my colleague Al Dam cannot join you this evening, Al and I work in the same unit as OMAFRA, and I work as a livestock specialist across species. I'm a big fan of Twitter. This is my Twitter account, and one of the resources I speak to tonight, I'll be sharing there, or have shared already, actually. So let me see if So it's been good weather. I'm going to keep this short because some of you probably have things to do that'll look a lot like this, which means, you know, we still have beans coming off and people frantically trying to get that done. And that is important stuff. Some people are already at things like replanting wheat. So this is one of the fellows I follow on Twitter. If you can see that now, I know my control bar is in the way here periodically. Replanting winter wheat is already something that's happening again too. So people are under significant time demands right now. And some of my feedlot cattle friends are already into things like cob meal in this particular case, recently taken picture. Point is, with all of these machines and all this field equipment going on, and Ashley just mentioned this thing about cell phones and touching, these machines are also a touch point. And it was actually one of my crop colleagues said to me today, was aware of tonight's webinar and wanted the message to come out to all of you. Also think about this field equipment, especially because we see some of these wild birds, you know, the Canada geese coming down in these fields. And then if you're running wheat planting equipment through it, think about that equipment as a point of spread. And if any of you are renting land or any of you running your own land in terms of crops, think about biosecurity on the machinery as well, please. One of the things I was asked to mention tonight or speak to are why bird events could be so problematic. And so I'm just going to leave it in fairly simple terms, and this is all I have for you. This is, you know, one of those infographics you'll see on the internet for, you know, contact points and trace out points. And that is really the nature of the challenge with these bird events. You know, so why is it bird events that we are looking at versus something like cattle sales, etc.? The bird events are different than, say, slaughtering poultry, because slaughter animals, whether in the poultry industry or pig industry or even in the cattle industry, slaughter groups tend to go as a single lot. So it's single flow of animals and they're all in one group. The difference we see with these bird events is that they are sometimes broken up. So the lots are broken up and they're moved around. And the other thing is that we do not have individual animal ID that is mandatory in birds that you would say see in cattle. So the ability to trace out these animals becomes far more challenging if there's any kind of commingling event. And even if we had it, frankly, the rate at which this disease can move and does move is more rapid than our ability really to trace out in real time and get ahead of it. So that becomes one of the challenges. And frankly, I can't think of anything in the other species that I work in that would have the kind of mortality we're talking about here. So both the severity of what we're dealing with and the nature of the dispersion through any of these bird events that are the topic of the order. Vaishnavi mentioned already that, you know, one of the challenges that events that have happened despite the order create this problem. And so, yeah, the disease can spread, and that's why we see it as a unique thing. So I just wanted to, you know, bring that to everyone's attention about why these events are different than, say, cattle sales, or why they're different than, you know, commercial lots of poultry continuing on for meat processing. So that brings me to the resource that maybe some of you will see. I'll just move my bar here again, my control bar. And this is an information sheet that as of today has been deployed through the feed industry. So if you are interested in copies of this for whatever 4-H clubs or any group you're involved with, we can provide these to you a hard copy as well. We can provide these to you electronically, or you can look for them coming through the feed industry here shortly. So that's it for me.
That's great. Thank you. Some crunchy tidbits there. So that's all of our formal content. So we are just going to move on. I see a couple questions here in the bottom. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A. Thank you, Kevin, for the positive feedback. We appreciate that. So I'm just gonna, did you, Luci, need a little more clarification around this first question on the emergency order, or are you good to go on answering it?
I do not understand to the pigeon combines, what that means, Michael.
Yeah, Michael, if you could just clarify what you mean by the pigeon combines. Is it the race or is it?
Yeah, or Michael, I'll take a crack at this, and then if I haven't explained it properly to Luci. So these combine races are lofts in which the birds have already been commingled as young birds in the spring. And so they're basically running as a single loft. So birds of different owners are already in the same housing or have been all summer.
Okay. Okay. So I do understand now the question. I know there are some tricky ones, and then nothing is like the order is not going to cover everything. It is more related to do not transport the birds to a different site, do not commingle birds from different sites. I know they've been probably combined before in a spring and they kept it that way, but the order relates to recent move between this time frame. Okay.
So Michael's just clarifying the pigeon combines transport the pigeons from numerous lofts to the race release points.
And transportation is part of the order. Do not transport the birds from one site to another. So it is under the order, transportation.
Okay. On a weekly basis.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael, for clarification.
Yeah, thank you for asking for that clarification. We have someone interested in clarification on when a bird becomes infected and starts shedding the virus. How long do they shed the virus for? And so by extension, if a wild bird is infected and they get ill but recover, do they continue to shed the virus? And do we know for how long? And will that bird continue to test positive for the rest of its life, even though it's not potentially shedding? Do we know anything about all of this?
So there are many aspects of this question. I'll try to answer all of them in order. So they've been testing to try if the carcass or the tissues derived from infected birds may present the risk of the virus spreading to humans, animals, and surrounding environment. And the tissues were stored at like 4 to 20 degrees Celsius. And they isolate the virus in different times for about 360 days. And the maximum periods for interval of the virus survival was observed in samples stored at 4 degrees Celsius, at 240 days for feathers, 160 days in muscle, and 20 days in liver.
Wow.
So you can imagine. Now, I would say at 56 degrees Celsius, the virus will be resistant for about 30 minutes. You'll find the virus that will resist about a day or so at 28 degrees Celsius. And like I said, over 100 days at 4 degrees Celsius. The biggest problem with survival in the birds, yes, they can recover. Some they can recover, but mortality in commercial or in domestic poultry, it's almost 100%. The reason is because this is called a highly pathogenic avian influenza virus. So it is affected almost all the birds, and mortality goes up to 100%. The carriers may be ducks and geese, and those, they may have symptoms as egg drop production, and then that'll be it. We're just dropping feed intake, and then they will recover and they will be considered carriers. Okay.
Okay. But we've seen a high incident in our domestic duck population, correct, from the spring?
That's correct. Okay. Yes. Yes. I hope I have answered the question. How long shed? There are many days, and then that's why it explains, let's say in Europe, where they do have right now a lot of, and they've had that in the past, in the last year, so a lot of outbreaks. It's because the birds that they are resident in, like they're not the migratory birds, they are the resident ones, they became carriers, and the place it's endemic right now because it can be spread from any bird. So.
Okay, and then just a follow-up question from that same person: do the carriers continue to shed? Do we know anything about that? Birds in remission, are they shedding?
Like I said, it stays in the muscle for about 100 days, or 100 days at 4 degrees Celsius. So it's, they will shed, yes.
Okay.
And that's why, and then sometimes they may say like, keep the bird away from other bird when you bring it out in a barn for about 30 days at least. It was 14 days before, because incubation is between 7 and 14 days for the avian influenza, but they will say just keep it for 30 days. They may shed during the virulent phase when the virus multiplies,
Okay.
large amounts.
Okay. And Michael's pushing us to clarify, because we're not picking up on a key point of his question, which is, I think it's more of the relationship between the primary control zones and the minister's order. So there's really nothing related to the pigeon combines in relation to the, unless you're in that zone.
And the primary control zone is CFIA related. And the ministry, Ontario ministry, came on the top of that and said, let's protect the flocks by putting this ministry's order. So if there is a flock in that area, both protection control zone and Ontario ministry's order take place.
Yeah. And remind us again what the expiration is for that order.
It is October 22.
Okay. Okay, have we got any other questions? Not seeing any questions. Well, thank you for having patience with us fumbling through your question, Michael. We appreciate that. There's a lot of complicated layers to all of this stuff. So. Okay, seeing no other questions, I guess we'll call it a wrap for tonight. Thank you for all the materials that our speakers prepared and presented. And we'll see you all again next week. And hopefully between now and then, it's a very uneventful period of time.